What's up, guys? It's Sam here, and I wanted to talk about behavioral finance and just cover some of the interesting bits of information that I don't think a lot of the financial press like to talk about or maybe are even aware of, and how some of these things impact us in the future. I'd like to make it into a series, so if you guys find it interesting, make sure to let me know down below in the comments. Okay, generally speaking, behavioral finance. So this is one of the areas I found super interesting while I was getting my MBA and going through the CFA. Behavioral finance. It draws into so there's basically you have the traditional or how economists used to think about finance and people making decisions, and that would be based upon a hypothesis of what you think would happen and then seeing what actually happens. Now, behavioral finance takes into account like the psychology. So it's like the 2.0. It's much more in depth and very interesting to me on how people actually are in making decisions in the financial markets and just in general. But you can use some of these over the next week or several weeks as I finish going through some of these biases to potentially understand better your customers or decision making that you make, or even just the first one here that I'm going to talk about, decisions like, excuse me, with your wife or significant other. Generally speaking, behavioral biases are broken down into two areas: cognitive and emotional, where cognitive errors are, to put down a couple notes here, are simply based on like faulty reasoning, where emotional biases are based on feelings or obviously emotions. And faulty reasoning might be a lack of information, the ability to process information, right? Or things along those lines, where emotions, I think, is pretty self-explanatory, but I'd like to get into each one of those and then the different parts within each one of those, so that if you can recognize some of these things, cognitive, right? Faulty reasoning, those just like intuitively you might think that like those are easier to correct for, and that's correct, or at least moderate for or recognize. Where the emotional ones, if you can start to be aware of them, where the cognitive ones you can probably fix or take care of through education, learning better information, and you're just using data, whereas the emotional ones, you have to have a greater deal of self-awareness to recognize those and at least try to like adapt to how people around you, whether that's your boss or your colleagues or your wife, might respond, or your customers, right? And just understanding some of these things helps you make better decisions. As I go on, I'll give you some examples too of how I use some of this information in real life. I just want to get into, and I took a note down here. Cognitive is decision making according to the spectrum of the totally rational decision making of traditional finance to purely emotional decision making. Well, here we go. Here it is. Cognitive errors are basic statistical information processing or memory errors that cause decision to deviate from the rational decisions of traditional finance. So that would be, traditional finance would predict this, but based on certain cognitive errors in the information processing, the answer or result or behavior might be this, right? And they're not the same. And that causes that, or that's what economists are trying to use to explain the difference. Emotional biases arise spontaneously think you guys could have guessed that one. As a result of attitudes and feelings that can cause the decision to deviate from the rational decisions of traditional finance. So, in traditional finance, you have, I think it's like REM, the rational, efficient markets, or something along those lines, where based on people making decisions in their own best interest, that take into consideration their level of risk aversion. And then there's different sub pieces to all these things. So risk aversion, you could have something that's a linear risk, somebody who is has a linear view towards risk, somebody who has a diminishing marginal returns from a risk standpoint, or one that has increasing marginal returns according to their risk. And then each one of these go in a little bit deeper, but basically it's what would a rational investor do based upon all these assumptions, and why is that different based on these emotional biases? Let's see. Because, as I mentioned, cognitive errors come from faulty reasoning. Better information, education, and advice, wait till I get into the first one, can help correct for this. Now, one of the things that's stated in here is that the emotional biases come from a state of mind, which is super interesting. One of the things that I think Tony Robbins uses often is the state, where you are here, right? The emotional state that you're in. Think about where you're doing right now. Now, take 5 minutes, get up and do 20 jumping jacks and do 10 push-ups and then do 10 more jumping jacks and then 10 more push-ups and then 10 more jumping jacks and then when you're done, you're in a completely different state. The energy is different, right? And through the process of doing that, think about how fucking amazing you are, that you can accomplish anything in the world, right? And it sounds like voodoo, but it works. So go through that and you change the state of mind. So if you're ever in a funk or you feel like you're making bad decisions, just a simple thing like that, you can change your state. So like if you're in a funk or not, whatever, at work or whatever the case is, or in a relationship, go do something and change your state to put yourself in a better mental state. Emotions are related to feelings, perceptions, or beliefs about elements, objects, or relations between them, and can be a function of reality or the imagination. Both of these you hear all the time, especially when people are talking about the excuses for not reaching their objectives, whether that's financially or in the gym or with anything, like within a relationship or something like that. And some of the emotional biases you can't necessarily eliminate like you could with the cognitive ones through better education and decision making, but the emotional ones you might be able to just adapt to or bringing awareness to them, I feel like allows you to make better decisions around them. And today I just wanted to get into one of the first, and I think a lot of people can relate to this one, is cognitive dissonance. And and cognitive dissonance relates to the mental discomfort associated with new information that's different than the information you already have. So you view this, right? You view this, and my thumb is white, right? Or off-white, and bloody and nasty, right? And then somebody comes along and is like, no, that's peach cream color, right? That's different than your view, and you're like, fucking no, you know what I mean? That's really, really difficult. And cognitive dissonance is the adjusting of those mental things that you have in your mind about. So I can actually read you what it has here. Cognitive dissonance is the mental discomfort that occurs when new information conflicts with previously held beliefs or cognitions. To resolve this dissonance, people may notice only information of interest. So I'm sure if you remember back for when you were a child, this may have happened to you, where people say that you have selective hearing. Well, that's a real thing. Or when you go looking for things, right? There's something out there called like the reticular activating system. Think of it as like when you set your mind to something, like actually 100% commit to it, then your mind figures out a way to get there. It's almost like a heat-seeking missile, right? Or something where if I'm like this, I need to hit this target, right? And it's aiming this way, then it's going to go like this and come back, and then it's going to hit the target. And it's almost like that. And what happens is I feel when people have a certain information or idea or belief about something or information that they saw, they only look for supporting information and they don't look for the opposite side of whatever it is that is available, right? Like you can look at how polarized the U.S. is about politics, right? And I live in the U.S. and I pay zero attention to politics. But you have such extremes where if anybody on either side were to take the time to understand their point of view, right, that would be so fucking painful for them. And they're so set against that, right? You try to talk to somebody who has a differing point of you, and they're so just like the mental discomfort with accepting that they might, whatever they believed could be wrong, is tremendous. And I think that that's something that happens a lot in relationships but that's also probably a lot had to do with ego, but where one party, the husband or wife or boyfriend, girlfriend or whatever, believes that they are correct, and the mental discomfort that comes with the information of like, yes, that's actually how it was, and what you believe here is incorrect, is so painful for so many people that they, whatever, because of their ego, because they don't have humility. I mean, it's probably different for a lot of people, but that causes such an issue, I feel like. But anyways, that's the first cognitive error that I kind of want to talk about. There's a bunch of different types of cognitive errors in here. I find this stuff kind of interesting. Very interesting. I don't know if you guys do. Make sure you let me know down below in the comments what your thoughts are, and I will continue this series. Don't forget to subscribe and press that thumbs up button. Peace.